Frank Delgado pulled up his bank account on a Wednesday morning in March and felt his stomach sink. The Social Security deposit that had always arrived like clockwork simply was not there, not reduced, not delayed, gone. He had picked up a part-time position at a hardware store 6 weeks earlier just to cover his property taxes, and now he was staring at his phone wondering whether that decision had wiped out his entire retirement check. Frank is not alone, and his story sits at the smaller end of something far bigger. There are 3 layers to what genuinely happens when you work while collecting Social Security before reaching full retirement age, and they become more surprising the further down you go. The first one is a misconception so widespread it stops people from even submitting a job application. The second one is the part that actually blindsided Frank, the part where an entire month's payment can vanish over what feels like a modest amount of additional income. And the third one I am saving for the end because it completely flips the narrative, and it is the part that almost nobody takes the time to explain, the part that transforms what looks like a permanent loss into something else entirely. I am Thomas Merritt. I have spent more than 15 years as a state bar-licensed estate attorney, sitting across kitchen tables just like Frank's, untangling exactly this kind of confusion for families. I am not here to sell you anything today. I am here because the way Social Security communicates this rule to the general public is technically accurate and practically useless. And that gap is where well-meaning people make costly decisions they never needed to make. So why does nobody walk you through this before you accept a part-time position? Because the rule lives buried inside a benefits planner page that most people never open, written in the kind of language designed for auditors, not for someone deciding whether to accept a job offer at the garden center. Nobody at Social Security reaches out before you begin working to explain how the math will actually unfold. It is not a conspiracy. It is simply a rule that was written once decades ago and was never translated into straightforward language for the people it affects the most. Now, before we get into the specifics, I want to state clearly that this rule only applies to a particular group of people, those who claim Social Security before reaching full retirement age and are still actively working. If you have already passed your full retirement age, none of this affects you whatsoever. You can earn any amount without a single dollar being held back. Keep that in mind as we move forward, because a great deal of unnecessary anxiety comes from people applying this rule to situations it does not actually cover. Let us begin with the misconception, because it is the one that stops people before they ever reach the real numbers. Barbara Enuan, 64 years old, was offered a part-time bookkeeping role she genuinely wanted. She turned it down. Her reasoning seemed completely sound. She had heard from a neighbor that returning to work would cancel her Social Security entirely, that the government would simply cut her off the moment a paycheck entered the picture. Here is the truth that stays hidden. That is not how it works, not even remotely. You can absolutely work and collect Social Security retirement benefits simultaneously. There is no rule that cancels your benefit simply because you accepted a job. What exists instead is an earnings limit, a specific dollar threshold, and only income above that threshold affects your check at all. For 2026, if you are under full retirement age for the entire calendar year, that limit is $24,480. Earn beneath that amount and your Social Security payment arrives exactly as expected, completely untouched, regardless of how many hours you are logging at that position. Only wages from employment or net profit from self-employment count toward that number as well. Income from a pension, an annuity, investment interest, or a 401k withdrawal does not factor into this limit at all, which surprises a great many people who assume all sources of income get grouped together. Barbara's mistake was not taking the job. It was accepting a myth that cost her a position she both wanted and needed. Pause the video for a moment and reflect on your own circumstances. If you have not yet reached full retirement age and you have been steering clear of work because you assumed any earnings at all would trigger a penalty, that assumption is the first thing to release. The real number to know is $24,480 for this year, and the practical action step is straightforward. If your expected earnings for the year fall anywhere close to that figure, that is your signal to continue reading into the next section, because that is where things become more specific. Which brings us to the part that actually caught Frank off guard, and it is more mechanical and more disruptive than most people anticipate. Raymond Voss turned 66 in September of this year, and his full retirement age landed right on that birthday. He assumed the same simple rule applied to him throughout the entire year, the same $24,480 limit that Barbara had to monitor. It does not. Here is the truth Raymond was never told. In the calendar year you actually reach full retirement age, an entirely different and considerably higher limit applies, and it only counts the earnings from the months before your birthday, not the full year. For 2026, that limit is $65,160, and once you exceed it, Social Security only withholds $1 for every $3 you earn above it, not one for every two. Raymond nearly walked away from his consulting contract in July out of fear he would blow past a limit that in his particular case did not even fully apply yet, because half his income that year arrived after his birthday month, when there is no limit whatsoever. But here is the part that genuinely surprised Frank, the mechanical detail that almost nobody mentions openly. Social Security does not shave a small portion off your check each month to account for extra earnings. It withholds complete monthly payments all at once until the total amount owed is satisfied. If Social Security projects you will earn $6,000 over your limit for the year, they do not quietly subtract small figures across 12 payments. They hold back your full monthly check for 4 consecutive months if that is what it takes to cover it. And that is precisely what happened to Frank. One modest part-time job, a projected overage of a few $1,000s, and an entire month's deposit simply did not appear, with no warning letter arriving beforehand. I encounter this exact scenario repeatedly in my practice, almost always following the same pattern. Someone takes on a bit of additional work, does not realize how the withholding actually gets applied, and then panics when a payment that has always arrived like clockwork simply does not show up. It is rarely a sign that anything has gone wrong. It is simply the mechanics of how this particular rule functions, and once you understand it, the shock disappears. So let us pause here for a moment, because this is the point in the video where things begin to feel heavier, and I want to make certain you are still holding on to something useful, not just an expanding sense of dread. We have covered the myth that working cancels your benefit entirely, which is not true. And we have covered the mechanical trap where complete checks disappear at once rather than small amounts gradually fading away, which absolutely is true and catches people off guard every single year. Stay with me, because everything I have described up to this point sounds like a straightforward loss. It is not. What comes next is the part of this video that matters more than anything else I have shared with you. Estelle Marsh, 65 years old, accepted a seasonal position at a garden center 2 years before her full retirement age. Social Security withheld 2 full months of her benefit that year because her earnings crossed the limit. She was devastated, certain that money was permanently gone, as though she had been penalized for the act of working. She contacted the Social Security office to ask whether anything could be done, and the first representative she reached gave her a vague and unhelpful response that left her believing the money was truly lost forever. She nearly stopped asking altogether. A second phone call weeks later to a different representative finally produced the real answer. And it is the answer this entire video has been moving toward. Those withheld months are not gone. When Estelle reached her full retirement age the following year, Social Security recalculated her monthly benefit to give her full credit for every single month that had been held back. as though she had simply started collecting a little later than she actually had. Because claiming later permanently increases your monthly amount, those 2 withheld months translated into a small permanent increase in her check for the remainder of her life. She did not receive a lump sum refund check delivered to her mailbox. What she received instead was quieter and over time worth considerably more, a slightly higher payment arriving every single month for as long as she lives. Here is roughly how that math works in everyday language. Say someone had 10 total months of benefits withheld across several years of working before reaching full retirement age. At full retirement age, Social Security essentially treats that individual as though they had begun collecting benefits 10 months later than they actually did. Claiming later always produces a higher monthly amount. So the recalculation quietly folds those 10 withheld months into a permanently elevated check going forward rather than a single one-time payment. It is not a bonus. It is your own money, simply returned to you on a different schedule than you originally anticipated. Now, before you assume this resolves everything perfectly for every single situation, let us address the objections I know some of you are already forming. If you are thinking you already claimed early and had benefits withheld years ago, so that money has been gone for a long time by now, it has not. The recalculation takes place automatically the month you reach full retirement age, whether that happened last year or is still 5 years away. And you do not need to complete any special paperwork to trigger it. If you are thinking you are not currently working, so none of this applies to your situation, remember that this becomes immediately relevant the moment you consider returning to work, even part-time. So it is worth understanding before that decision, not after it. And if you are thinking this must work differently for spousal or survivor benefits, the earnings test does apply to those benefits as well when you are under full retirement age. Although the specifics of the recalculation can differ, which is precisely the kind of detail worth verifying directly with Social Security for your individual situation rather than making assumptions. One additional scope note worth mentioning because it trips people up nearly as often as the whole check rule does. This entire recalculation process happens automatically behind the scenes. Social Security reviews earnings records every year for everyone still working while collecting benefits. And if a more recent year turns out to be among your highest earning years, they will factor that into your benefit as well. Separately from the withholding credit, you do not need to request either adjustment. You do, however, need to report your expected earnings to Social Security at the beginning of each year if your income shifts significantly, because that is what determines how much gets withheld in the first place. And getting that estimate wrong in either direction can mean an uncomfortable surprise or a brief delay while things get sorted out. Here is your precise next step. If you are currently working and under full retirement age, log into your My Social Security account and compare your projected earnings against this year's limit for your specific situation. Either $24,480 if you are under full retirement age for the entire year, or $65,160 if you are reaching it at some point during 2026. If you have ever had a payment withheld in a previous year, you do not need to take any action to receive that recalculation. It happens automatically the month you reach full retirement age. If you want to confirm it was applied correctly, call Social Security directly at 1-800-77-21213 and ask them specifically to walk you through your recalculated benefit amount. Let us bring this all together because on its own, each piece sounds like an entirely separate rule, but stacked together, they tell one continuous story. We started with the myth, the fear that working cancels your benefit outright, which is simply not accurate. Then came the mechanical trap, the part that genuinely catches people off guard, where Social Security withholds complete payments all at once rather than small amounts, and where the considerably higher limit in your full retirement age year carries its own separate calculation. And finally, the part that changes how you ought to feel about all of it. The fact that none of those withheld months are truly gone because Social Security quietly returns them to you permanently in the form of a higher payment for the rest of your life. Here's the core idea I want you to walk away with today. The earnings limit is not a punishment for working. It is a temporary hold, not a permanent loss. And understanding that distinction is the difference between making a fear-driven decision and making an informed one. So here is your 3-step plan. First, know your actual limit for this year based on whether you are under full retirement age for the entire year or reaching it in 2026. Second, if a payment does get withheld, do not panic and do not assume that money is gone, because it is not. Third, mark your full retirement age on your calendar and verify your recalculated benefit with Social Security directly once you arrive there. A brief note before you go. This video is for general educational purposes only. It is not legal or financial advice, and every person's earnings history, claiming age, and benefit type are different enough that they can change how these rules apply to them. Always confirm your specific numbers directly with the Social Security Administration before making any decision about work or claiming. If this video brought some clarity to a confusing topic for you, share it with someone you care about who is thinking about returning to work or who is afraid to because of a rule that has never been properly explained to them. It might be the difference between them accepting a job they genuinely want and turning one down out of a fear that was never entirely accurate. I am Thomas Merritt, and I will see you in the next one, where we are going to talk about a mistake buried inside millions of Medicare Advantage renewal letters that almost nobody catches until it is too late.